Hello, my name is Alf, I do stuff, and this is Bad Blender Tutorials. So in this tutorial today, we're going to be showing you how to make a marching army of nodes. If that sounds weird, here's an example. It's looping as well, which is cool. Infinite loops and nodes. It's a bit of a meme. No one ever wants to know this, but hey, it's Bad Blender Tutorials, so let's go. So you want to start off your Blender scene, and bada bing bada boom. You've got your scene, you can move around it. This is not a beginner tutorial. I'm assuming you know how to move around Blender, but we will be changing a few of the render settings. So we'll be going to 30 FPS, obviously. We don't need the alpha background on the PNG, so we're not going to be like rendering out transparent backgrounds. And compression can be set to 0. We're also going to want to go into color management and make sure it's on filmic, like high contrast or something like that, just so you get the good bit there, you know. Next, what you want to do is press A to select everything and press delete to delete it all. And then we're going to add a plane. We're going to add a texture. I've already got these textures like pre-made, but you just want to grab a screenshot of the node without any of the borders on or anything. So we'll go into the shading tab here. It should have already put us into shading mode. And if we add a new texture, well, I've got the Node Wrangler add-on installed. So you need to just go into File or Edit Preferences, go into Add-ons and just search for Node Wrangler. If you don't have it already, and that allows me to just press Ctrl-T, and I can already set up like some node setups. So we're going to open a new image texture. I've got these saved on my desktop. I've got two different ones saved. I'm going to use the hue saturation one because that's the one I used in the video in the opening. So if we open that up, you can see it's loaded in pretty well, but you can probably see it stretched it a bit. So sometimes it might be like that if you've got your texture scaled wrong or something like that, or it might be really thin like this. The easiest way to do that is just to scale it in a little bit until it looks about right. So once we've scaled that, we're then going to go into edit mode. We're first going to grab these two edges on the side here, press E to extrude, right click to just put them in place, and then scale them on the x-axis just out a little bit like that. And then we're going to want to do the same with the top vertices. And it's important you add another edge that goes along this yellow line here. So if you press Ctrl R to bring up the loop tool, just add another one just on that line there. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now what we want to do is just select all of these loops here, absolutely every single one of them. So once you've got all of the edges selected, you want to just press Shift E to do the old, can't remember what it's called, crease. It'll crease the edges, and just type in 1, which is the maximum value. Next, what we're going to want to do is go into face selection mode by pressing 3, or you can go up in the top left here and select one of these ones. And what you're going to want to do is just select the outside bottom faces around this grey area here. Don't do the ones at the top there, we'll do that in a separate thing. You want to go to the Materials tab down here, add a new material, create a new one, and I'm just going to call this one like grey, just so that I know what it is. And I'll also rename the other one to texture, just so I know that that's the texture on the face, and this one's just going to be the grey material. So what we're going to want to do now is, because we've got these nodes down here, we can just eyedropper the colour, so we can just get the color from that node, and then we're going to assign these faces to that material. So now you should see it's pretty much there. Yeah, there's a little bit of a yellow line there. What you can do is you just edge select that and just grab it up a little bit. There you go, so that's gone now. You'll notice there's like a little bit of a pattern, but who cares? Who cares? Come on. We're going to do similar thing to that at the top here. And then this time we're going to just add a hue saturation node so we can take the color from it. So now you should have something that's roughly like this. It should have like a nice border around the outside, but it's not 3D. We want it to be 3D so that it can be moved around in 3D space and look somewhat alright. So we're going to select everything by pressing A in edit mode, and we're just going to extrude it up like roughly a square amount. So until those faces on the side look like a square, that's kind of what you want. You can extrude it however thick you want your thing to be, but the thicker you go, the more weird it will look when it's walking. Because yes, we are animating them to walk. So now you should have just a box here. To make it less boxy, what we're going to do is we're just going to add a Subdivision surface modifier and right click and shade smooth, just so that it's nice and smooth. And because we added these seams in earlier, it shouldn't do that. Although these edge ones here might do that, so you might need to just select these edge ones and give them some more Shift E action. Oh yeah. Also, it'll do this on the bottom. It'll give you that. So you can just go into face select mode, and just change that one to grey and change that face to yellow. And that will stop it from having that texture on the back. What we want to do now is go back to layout mode. I'm going to leave it in this mode so I can see the texture on it. Just going to rotate it on the x-axis so it's standing up 90 degrees. And then I'm going to go into edit mode, select everything and grab it on the z-axis until it's roughly on the floor there, so it's touching. It just means if you want to rotate it on the x-axis, it rotates properly rather than rotating from the middle. Right, speaking of, we need to get this animated now, but before we animate it, we're going to want to just disable the subdivision surface viewport to 0, just so that it doesn't slow down our computer when we're animating it and when we're doing the arrays later on. So what you want to do is go into the Object tab down the bottom here, the green one, and under Shape Keys, you want to just add in 3 shape keys. The first one I'm just going to call Main, the second one I'm going to call Left, and the third one, you guessed it, that's right. Okay, so once you've created all of your shape keys, you want to disable the main one so we can't see that and it's not affecting any of the other ones. And then what you want to do is you want to just bind the left one to the right, and then make sure the right is bind to the main. This just makes it easier down the line, just trust me on this one. What we're then going to do is set the right to 1 and go into edit mode. And now what we're going to want to do is move the right foot forwards. Make sure you use proportional editing, which is this one up here, because otherwise it will only grab the vertices you've selected. I'm going to move that forward a decent amount. So for this one, I'm going to move it forwards a decent amount. So I'm going to move it forwards like -0.5, so that it moves forwards like an even amount. And I'm going to do the opposite for the other foot. So now it looks like some weird monstrosity thing. And if you go into object mode, and you can adjust this value now, you can see it stretching. So we're going to, again, leave that one at 1, and then click on the left, so we're editing that one now. And we're going to just do the opposite, so we want to grab that by double what we did last time. So I'm going to grab that one on the y-axis, -1. I'm going to grab that on the y-axis, 1. So now when you increase this one, you can see it now starts walking. So this is what we're going to be animating, just back and forth between these two. Right, speaking of animating it, let's do that. Just going to go to the animation tab, just because I find it easier using all the different tabs. It gives you a nice interface to use then. So what we want to do is we want to start the frame when we've got our value at one of the extremes. So for this one, we're just going to start it at 0. So if you hover over the value and press I, that will add a keyframe, and then just scrub however far along your timeline you want to go, and just type in 1 and then press I again, and it should be yellow when it's got a keyframe. So now you can see it's animating between 1 and 20 frames. It's animating once. So however quick you want your steps to be, you can adjust this. So if I want a really, really slow step, I can move that really, really far and it will step really, really slowly. Or you can move it really, really close and it will step really, really quickly. So I'm going to go for 20 frames just because that's a nice sort of middle ground to go with. So that looks good for me now. I like the speed of that. And if you like the speed of it, you can then grab all of those, Control C to copy them, and just skip another 20 frames and just paste them all on however long you want your animation. I'd recommend you do your animation an even number of steps so that it ends on the same step. So this one has the right foot forwards, left foot forwards, right foot forwards, left foot forwards. We want to stop on the right foot forwards, so we'll go to like 80 frames. There we go. So now when you play it, it should infinitely loop of your little guy stepping. Looks ridiculous, but hey. So we're going to go for 80 frames, and he's doing like 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. So you want to make sure it's an even number of steps. So now what we want to do is actually make this thing walk forwards as it's stepping along. Because at the moment it's just sort of on a treadmill, just running around. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into side view like this. Going to start at the start of our timeline, press I, and animate the location. So now this is where that distance comes in from earlier. So I moved each foot forwards 0.5, which means that if it goes to frame 20, this foot has moved forwards from the back, it's moved forwards 0.5. So I know that from frame 0 to 20, I need to move my object 0.5. And you just times that about however many steps you've got. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. So what I need to do is I need to go to the end frame and just grab it on the y-axis -4, and then keyframe the location. So now you should see, when you play the animation, it walks forward at roughly the right sort of speed. It's not quite right because it's using Bezier interpolation, so if we grab those 2 frames there, make sure you don't grab the bottom ones, just the 2 that we've added for the transform. If you right click and go to interpolation mode and set it to linear, that means that when it animates along, it will just move linearly instead of speeding up and then slowing down again. There we go. So he's doing 4 little shuffles along the floor. You can even do this in 3D mode and it looks hilarious, but yep, that looks just how I wanted it to. Right, so now we've got this one singular one animated. How do we create an entire army? Well, that's simple. We use the array mode. Array mode? Array modifier. My words, they're not working today. So now what we want to do is we want to add arrays to this. I'm going to go back into layout to make it easier so I've got a bigger view of what I'm looking at. So I want to go into the modifiers tab. We've already got the subdivision, but underneath that we're going to place 2 arrays. So at the moment you can see it's just arraying it the same direction twice. So if I disable one, it's duplicating it once, then duplicating again. What we want to do is make sure we're not using relative offset. We want to use a constant offset. Relative offset, what that does is it translates it based on the distance. So when it's set to 2, that's now 2 widths of this away from where it used to be. Whereas the constant offset uses the world space, which is what we want to use. So for the constant offset, we're going to distance it by about, I don't know, 3.5 meters, not 0.5, 3.5 meters. This depends on the scale of your plane. So just do it to whatever looks good to you, like a good distance between them. You don't want to put them right up against each other, and you also don't want them really far away from each other. Just a real quick editor's note here. Don't follow what I'm saying here. The sideways array is fine, you can do that distance however you want, but when it comes to doing the array the other direction, on the z-axis, you want to make sure that that's a multiple of the amount you've moved your nodes. So when you did the translate and you moved it, I moved it forwards 4 units, you want to make sure it's a multiple of 4. So either that's 4 or 8 or 16 or however many, or like 2. Just make sure it's a multiple of whatever you moved it forwards by. If you want to do like smaller increments, just when you previously in the tutorial when I moved it 4, make sure you move it less, but you might also have to reduce the step amount as well. So it depends on a lot of things. It's not a very good system, but it's the way I used it and it worked just about. So yeah, back to the video. And we're going to do the same for the other array, except this time we're not moving on the x-axis, we're going to move it on the z-axis, and we're going to move it forwards, I don't know, like 3 meters, so that we've got a nice little squadron of 4 hue saturation nodes. What you can do is you can up the count on these arrays as well to just increase the size. If you're having problems with frame rates once you do this and you up all of the counts of the arrays to even more, in fact I'm actually going to go -3 on the second arrays, just so that it goes backwards instead of forwards. If you're having problems with increasing the counts of these arrays, it may be because you've got the viewport levels up to 2. So if I animate this now, it's not too bad, but if I start increasing this, it starts reducing the frame rate quite a bit. So I recommend just leaving this off until the render. And the render will sort it out with all the subdivision, it'll look nice. We'll go for a 20 by 20 grid, yeah. So now you've got your nice little army that's moving forwards by a certain distance each time. Now what we're going to want to do is just add a camera and zoom in on like a sort of spot in the middle here somewhere into this. My camera's doing all sorts of weird stuff. There we go. So I'm going to zoom in something like that, and that's roughly what I want my camera to view. So if we go view, align view, and align active camera to view, your camera is now looking at this. You can also press N to bring up this and rotate it around and move it if you don't like where it is. So you notice there you can see it move. That's because I've set up my frames wrong. So on the final frame, they've got their right foot forwards and these two on this line here. On the previous frame, they're slightly different. So that just means I need to increase my array a little bit. So you'll notice that when I'm animating it now, it's jumping back at the end of the animation. That's because the array is not set to the distance that these guys travel. So it needs to be set to the multiple, like the entire distance these guys travel. So these guys, remember we animated them and they're traveling 0.4, or not 0.4, just 4 meters. So we just need to make sure that this is a multiple of those 4 meters. So if we set that to -4, you'll now see that the army loops perfectly and you don't notice a loop. If you want to like decrease this, just make sure it's at like a multiple of 4. So for me it would like be 0.2. So that would also work. And in fact, I like the look of -2 better than I do -4. So once you're happy with your setup here, what you can then do is add a ground plane in, and we're going to light it and do some camera fandangling. So if you only wanted to know how to make an army, here you go. That's your tutorial. Watch on if you want to know how to make it look nice. So we're going to add a plane, scale it up massively, because it doesn't really matter. And we're going to go to shading and add a new material for this plane. We're going to press the same Control-T trick to grab up the texture nodes, but this time we're going to use the object instead of UV. And we're going to delete the image texture. So now what you want to do is you want to add a texture, add a Voronoi texture, and a color ramp texture. Plug the distance into the factor, and then you can press Control-Shift-Click to preview what it's got. And if you change the scale of the Voronoi texture up a little bit, you can start to see it's got these weird dimples. That's not what we want, so we're going to change the randomness to 0 and change the mode to Chebychev? I don't know. However you say that. I think it might be Russian or something. So now you've got these even looking black diamonds. To create like a grid, what you want to do is set it to constant and then just decrease this value until you start seeing it. And I'm going to change the colors of these two. So the lighter color is the color of the black color. The main color of this is going to be the main color of these node group colors, I guess. And then the white color is going to be just a darker version of that. So it's just like very slightly darker, so you can see a slight grid. There we go. And I might even thicken this a little bit as well. So now when you go into camera view, you should see under your soldiers, you've got a nice Portal-esque Half-Life or Garry's Mod or whatever the Valve, you know, the Valve default grid they use in all the games. This is looking good now. And by good, I mean terrible, but it's good in a terrible way. So now you should have a looping animation. And you shouldn't see any loops. Maybe I need to increase the array a little bit because at the back there you can see it's not that one, this one. There we go. Just increase that a little bit so they don't disappear off the screen. If you're happy with everything you've got, you can then go into rendered view and we'll start setting up the lighting properly. So in the world settings, we're going to create the color to somewhere in the middle and set the strength to about 1 or maybe 1.5 so that it's nice and bright. I'm going to go back into the layout tab to make this easier when I'm lighting it. And I'm going to add a light sun lamp. Just grab it on the Z-axis so I can see it, and then just like rotate it a bit so that it's affecting it. If you can't see it, make sure you're in the rendered view. And if you still can't see it, you're an idiot like me and you forgot to plug in the actual shader down here. So make sure you plug in the color to the base color, and then you get rid of the viewer and plug in that to the surface. Now you should see the nice shadows from the sun lamp. And if you go into the camera view, you should get a nice even looking lighting over all of these little guys that are doing their thing. If the reflections are a little bit too high on these guys, what you can do is you can go into the sun lamp settings and just change the specular down a little bit so it has less reflections on the side. So I'm going to go for like a 0.5. And if the plane is like a little bit too bright, you can also go back into the shading tab and just decrease the specular a little bit. And that should, there we go, make it look a little bit darker. So it has less reflections that it uses, basically. The final thing we're going to do here is just add a little bit of blur onto the lens so that it's not as even as it is. So it looks like it's a little bit more, I don't know, professionally done, I guess. Even though this takes like 10 minutes to do when you're not doing a tutorial. So we're going to click on the camera, just enable the depth of field, and we're going to go into viewport display and enable the limits just so we can see that little plus is where the focus is trying to focus on. So I'm going to move this just sort of in between these ones by changing the focal distance. Just make that 12 or something, so it's sort of just so it's like in the middle of where I want it to be, so that when I'm looking at it, it's taking the middle of the frame and making that in focus. I can then change the f-stop to something like 0.3 so that it gives some blur on the background. So if I play it now, you'll see it's a little miniature marching node army band of node armies. So now all you have to do is just go into rendering and hit F12, and that should give you a nice render. If you're having problems with the shadows, by the way, like I can see down there it's not quite working properly, it's a bit bright. If you go back into layout and then go into the render settings for Eevee, because I didn't say we should be using Eevee. Make sure you've got Eevee selected so you're using that, not cycles. Just enable ambient occlusion. And I'm going to actually increase the precision. And then, decrease the factor a little bit so it's not as intense. And then in my sun settings, I'm also going to go and into the shadow settings and enable contact shadows just so that it gives some more realistic shadows. And now if you render it, it should look a little bit better. So you can mess with the render settings however you want, but this is basically how you do it. So that's my tutorial. There you go. That's about it. Got nothing else. So if you don't mind, liking it would help, subscribing would help even more. And yeah, that's about it. If you want me to do any more stupid stuff like this, chuck it in the comments. And I'll try and get on it. I'm probably going to do more of these anyway because they're fun to make and they're stupid. It's just a good combination that I like. Fun stuff and stupid stuff. It's always good. But anyway, I'll see you later. Peace.